Hello and welcome to the 7th episode of my trip down memory lane back to the Pacific Crest Trail in my Thru-hike from exactly 10 years ago. This is a special episode because it's the last leg of our journey through the Southern Californian desert. In the next episode we will finally be in the Sierras, and that's the first giant milestone. The PCT is usually divided into 5 parts: Southern California, Central California, Northern California, Oregon and Washington. And by the end of this episode, we'll have completed the first part, the first giant leg of the trail, Southern California. And then we'll be entering a completely new territory. And that was definitely something that was on our minds the whole time now on this last stretch from Tehachapi to Kennedy Meadows, because that was going to be such a massive change to our journey. And yes, in the last episode we walked from Tehachapi, then we did a lot of resupplying there for a few places in Central California, for example Independence, where we'll be going to in the next episode. And then sometime in the afternoon on our third day, I think, in Tehachapi, we hitched back out to the trail, and that's where we are heading now. As always, we hiked into the night. You can now see it here on my camera. There was so much sand in there that I now have small grains of sand on the lens from time to time. Yeah, but that's also part of this experience somehow, because back then in 2015, the cameras weren't all dust and waterproof, and I only had a very small compact camera with me, and we already had trekked about 600 miles through the desert, and we were now on the way of the last 150 or so miles through the desert, and we hiked into the night again, and then this fantastic full moon rose, a really great experience, then hiking again in the moonlight with this awesome moon, so that was really great. I can still remember it very well now. It is just great to experience something like that in the middle of nature. It's even better than when you look out of the window and see such a great moon, because it somehow has something very primal, something very archaic, which somehow leaves a very deep impression on your mind when you stand there in the middle of the desert, look up into the sky and see a moon like that. It was really great. At some point we pitched our tent near this spring, and in the morning we took a lot of water. There were also a few cows. You cannot see them in the photo here, but they also helped themselves to the spring. You can see the water is a bit cloudy. That was actually usually the case. We filtered it, and then it was, it's never completely clear, but it's definitely pleasant to drink and doesn't taste like sand or anything. But that was always our morning routine when we camped at the spring. First filling up with water for the next time, cameling up with water by drinking some, and because in the desert we usually only passed 1 or 2 water sources a day, and sometimes not even one, and we always prepared a lot for the day. To be honest, I don't have that many memories from this last stretch of the desert. I think that a lot of things merged together in my head, because somehow the focus was only on Kennedy Meadows, on reaching Kennedy Meadows, which is the small village at the beginning of the Sierras where everyone is kind of longing to reach it, and everybody takes a little break for a day or two to prepare for the Sierras, to regain some strength. And this word Kennedy Meadows is so imprinted in the brain that you really you want to be there, and when you're going to be there pretty soon, it's just a crazy feeling, and the day somehow flew by pretty quickly on this last episode of desert. I don't know how many days we were on the road from Tehachapi. I think it was like a week or so, and I have fewer memories than of other episodes, even some that were much shorter. But what I do remember well is that we went back into the forest again, which was very pleasant, because as always the heat was more bearable. And what I also remember is that it started with the mosquitoes. That was a little foretaste of the Sierras, which are very mosquito infested apparently, and this was the first time we really had an increase in mosquitoes. Of course, I didn't think it was great, but that's also part of the experience. Exactly. We then went back up a bit, and I can remember this spot here very well. I thought it was a really surreal picture somehow that there were these two mini mountains in this valley, which I thought was really beautiful. Here you can see that again, almost as if it wasn't real. It seemed kind of strange to me. I definitely remember standing there and looking at it for a while. It was often the case that I didn't actually take in everything I saw all the time, not every landscape, not every tree, and so on. I was often in a mental tunnel, but when something caught my eye again, like this valley, for example, then I suddenly woke up and had a moment of clarity where I realized, wow, this is really crazy where I'm standing here and where I'm looking at. And it's all so surreal and so special and so great that I can experience it for free, basically. So yeah, I remember this place very well. Yeah, and then we also hit the 600-mile mark. Yeah, I don't know what was started to be written down here. There's a T. I don't know. I didn't do it, but yeah, it was just another 100 miles done. 600 miles is even closer to Kennedy Meadows, which is at 702. And then at some point we just whizzed past these numbers. But yeah, then we went back into the desert, which I also enjoyed. It was another longer stretch at the slightly lower altitude, which gave us another opportunity to say proper goodbye to the desert. And I've put together a few pictures here that are pretty representative of the desert, namely the snakes here, the watch out for snake signs, and then these sandy trails. It was really dusty without end. You always had sand all over your shoes and in your shoes. It just goes through the pores of the mesh. And yeah, and also Joshua trees. These are the trees here, which I also really liked. Just cool trees. They're mainly found in Joshua Tree National Park, of course, but they are also everywhere else in lower altitudes. And of course, the flowers in the desert. A lucky coincidence for us that we had them so far into the journey because it was so wet in this year. And then you could see the Sierras in the distance for the first time, which was totally amazing. I then imagined that it was Mount Whitney because it's such a high mountain. I have no idea whether it really is. I don't think so, but it was like that. I suddenly saw these much higher mountains in the distance, and I thought, I think I could see snow on them, and that was somehow so amazing that I was finally there. And yeah, we're almost there, and we have actually made it there, and will now experience this different kind of hiking at high altitude with lots of water, lots of plants, animals, and that was all waiting for us. And it was really cool to see how close we had actually come to it, because we always had in the back of our minds that it meant we had already walked an extremely long way. You don't always notice that when you're hiking. It's actually like any other everyday activity, any job, I'd say, where you just do the same thing every day. And you might not realize the amount of work you're doing every day, but when after a month you realize what you have done, then you might think, wow, that's a lot. And it's a bit like that. Of course, it's much nicer than working. That's, of course, clear. But what I'm trying to say is that you've walked 30 kilometers a day, 20 miles. And yeah, that's the case. But you're not always aware that you've already walked 600, 700, 800 kilometers. And you know that, this spot, the Sierras, is 700 miles or 1,100 kilometers from the border, and when you see it from for the first time, it's suddenly like, wow, that's amazing. We've already walked that far, and that is a crazy feeling. Yeah, but we go back to the desert before we get to the higher mountain range again. Of course, we also saw another snake, another rattlesnake. I don't know exactly what kind it is. I thought it was a bit unusual because it has such a round head. The others were actually a bit more like longer faces, but it's definitely a rattlesnake, so you can recognize the rattle at the back. I don't think I'd seen them like that before either, but it was actually always the case that you were constantly discovering new animals that you hadn't seen before. That was also something we were looking forward to in the Sierras, because there was also the chance of seeing bears and marmots and porcupines and whatnot. And we were really looking forward to that. Yeah, so As I said, the days melted into each other. We did our trail every day, occasionally catching a glimpse of the Sierras, but then we were really back in the desert and it was really, really hot again. And there was also very little water in places. I think the longest stretch was almost 30 miles without water. Fortunately, there were lots of water caches everywhere. Of course, we didn't plan for them because you never know if there will be any and where they are, but it was always a welcome change when you came around the corner and suddenly saw a few cans of water and sometimes a bit of fruit or some granola bars or something. That was always very nice, especially in the heat where you just, I had 5 liters of water with me most of the time and I needed those, but it certainly didn't hurt to drink 2 liters more over the course of the day, spread over 3 water caches or so. And that's what I always did in any case. I stumbled across a water cache. Yeah, you can also see a few more Joshua trees here. They look really cool, don't they? I think these trees are super beautiful. I think somehow, they look almost like a cross between a cactus and a tree. And I always really enjoyed them. And they were also great to take a break because they provided plenty of shade. I remember we once had a Joshua tree water cache too. There were really big Joshua trees in there. So they were more or less in a circle and the water cache was stored in there and there were also a few chairs and such and it was very pleasant in the midday heat. Yeah, this milestone here, I don't know who laid it out. Probably not an American, metric system. And there was a New Zealander before us. Maybe it was him, I don't know. But 1,000 kilometers was a milestone that was really cool for us. 1,000 kilometers is such a large number that we can relate to more than mileage. At the beginning, I remember we were still converting how much we actually hiked. At some point, we had a feeling of how far it was to walk, like 7 miles or something. But in the beginning, it wasn't like that. And 1,000 kilometers was pretty crazy to us. It's such an incredible distance. It's longer than Germany is long. And yeah, when you suddenly see it, white on brown or brown on brown, it's an incredible feeling to have done it and without any major problems. Of course, I had my illness in between and blisters and twisted my ankles and so on, but all in all, it was actually really doable and we managed it really well. And it was also a great situation when we saw that 1,000 kilometers down there to realize how strong we were. And even though we haven't really prepared for it, I was not a competitive athlete or anything like that. And I didn't do sports before I started the trail. But I think any healthy body can actually do it without too much effort. And that's when I realized that we humans are actually designed to do that. Our entire system is designed to cover long distance during the day, and we simply don't do that anymore. We actually spend most of our time sitting around in our office chairs, and that's actually tragic. I think we should all start walking more again. The desert is behind us. That's where the high Sierras begin. You probably can't see it so well now, but there's even snow back on there. We have now climbed 1,000 feet out of the heat here, and now we seem to have left it behind us for good. Maybe down once again, but you can see trees and mountains in that direction. Wow, that's done. Yeah, I thought that was it for the desert because we were at slightly higher altitude again and you could already see the foothills of the Sierra here. But as so often the case, it went down again. But yes, the spirit was like, okay, now we've really put the desert behind us and now we're off on the second major leap of our journey. But as I said, it went down again for a short time. Then we crossed another marker here, the 1/4 marker. I thought that was nice too, because then you really know, okay, now you've done a quarter of the trail, which is so much now. A quarter is almost halfway, and halfway is already closer to the finish than the start. That's how I imagined it in my head. But of course, I definitely thought it was really, really nice to see this quarter thing. And these are our last great desert views. And when I look at it now, I get really nostalgic. So everything that follows on the trail is also super great. And Washington in particular was actually even more beautiful than the desert. But yeah, I say this, this naivety, this youthfulness that you have at the beginning of the trail in the desert, you no longer have that afterwards. You grow up, so to speak, in these 700 miles of desert. And somehow it's a shame, all that euphoria, all that joy and discovering everything for the first time, resupplying for the first time, seeing animals for the first time, camping in the desert for the first time, and so on. Of course, all that is no longer there once you've made it much further. And yeah, I can remember that there were so many discoveries in this desert stage, so much more than in the later stages where you had somehow calmed down a bit and somehow were in a bit of a routine and no longer have, you don't have that great sense of adventure anymore. Although you are still on an adventure, of course. And I think I had matured with experience, and I no longer had this, I would almost call it childlike enthusiasm that was missing at some point. But I think that's fair. But when I see it now, the last desert pictures, I remember that feeling, and it's impressive how much that feeling has become ingrained in myself and how long it stays with me. Yeah, those were the last few meters towards Kennedy Meadows. You can see at the back here it's green, and Kennedy Meadows itself is in the forest. It's not really a forest, but there's a river that runs along it, and so there are a few trees. And when we saw that, we realized, okay, we're almost there now. Kennedy Meadows is just around the corner. And yeah, we were really looking forward to meeting people there again and having something to eat and so on, and then finishing off this great episode of desert hiking. But before that, we passed the 700-mile mark, 2 miles to Kennedy Meadows left, and we were rewarded with a nice river here, this river that runs along it. And then we went for a long, not really a swim, but a bath, which was really nice because we hadn't been able to get any water on our bodies since Tehachapi because there simply wasn't any water. When there's the only water is just some very thin running springs, you just use them sparingly. You don't start making outdoor showers or anything like that. So it was very pleasant to jump into the cool water again to refresh ourselves, even though we could have a shower at Kennedy Meadows. But it was very nice, and I can remember that we sat there and just in the stream, and all the other hikers came past us and were like, you're lying around there like that? Why? You're almost in Kennedy Meadows. And we were like, yeah, why not? It's totally relaxing. And it was definitely nice. But later we arrived at Kennedy Meadows, and here I am with the guest book. I've put a little drawing in here. 1,125 kilometers of desert. Yeah, that's just crazy. It says Shadowhawk over here. I've just seen that. That's the first time I've ever seen that. That's the guy who inspired me to go to Thru-hiking. Who we met him earlier in an early episode at Mike's place. Yeah, Kennedy Meadows itself was super cool. So we got there and it was like, there's this general store, the famous one with this big porch area outside, like a deck, and everyone sat on it, and there was a big round of applause for everyone who hiked in. So everyone applauded, and that was kind of cool. It was like a bit like finishing a marathon and then running through the finish line and having everything fall away from you. And that's actually how it was. You were kind of welcomed and celebrated for your achievement, and that's nice, I think. There were also a few people there that I already knew and hadn't seen for a while because somehow, it all builds up a bit at Kennedy Meadows. Everybody stays there. And we had a drink and something to eat and set up our tent behind the general store, had a shower and picked up our parcels. And then we went also to Grumpy Bear's. It's, it's not, I would say it's not a resort, but something like that. So you can eat there and stay there, and there's a small outdoor shop and so on. It's a few kilometers further on. And I think it's nowadays even more popular spot than a general store, but not back then. You only really went there if you wanted something else to eat, or if you picked up your bear canisters like we did, because from now on, we were supposed to carry a bear canister for our food and our, stuff that smells. And back then in 2015, there was a program at Grumpy Bears where they gave European hikers, or basically any hikers who applied to the program, free bear canisters. As Americans, you probably have a bear canister if you are a long distance hiker. But for us Europeans, there is just no need for anything like that. And so this program was really nice. So we got the bear canister for free, and everything we had to do was return it after the stretch. We sent it home to Grumpy Bears from Lake Tahoe, I think. And this was of course super great, because it only cost us $5 compared to a bear canister costing, I don't know, $150 or something like that. And yeah, it was a great offer, and we were happy to accept it. And we picked it up at Grumpy Bears, but we also had, of course, the all-you-can-eat pancakes and enjoyed that too very much. Yeah, I think we stayed 2 or 3 nights in Canadian Meadows itself. I'm not sure at the moment, but that's what I think. And we met a few well-known trail angels there, of course. And then there was this weird guy who kind of invited us to his house. And we wanted to go there in the evening, but somehow we couldn't find his house. Instead, we were followed by some guard dogs, and it was all a bit sketchy somehow. And we then went back and kind of said to ourselves, yeah, okay, civilization, we don't want it anymore, and went into the tent and went out next day to the Sierras. But somehow it was all very cool in Canadian Meadows, and somehow funny people, a cool vibe, because everyone was very blissful that they had now managed the desert, and now something new was coming, something new exciting was coming, new challenges, new exciting experiences. And yeah, but also somehow everyone was really proud. There was this sense of collective pride in the air. So we were all in the same situation, having just survived an insane journey through the desert. And yeah, that's what I can remember from Canadian Meadows, that we all had a lot of good conversations there, met a lot of people again. It was kind of like a little reunion before everybody went out to hike the Sierras. But nonetheless, even that had to change at some point, and we finally set off for the Sierras. But we go into that in the next episode. And as always, if you liked it, please subscribe to my channel. Leave a comment if you have anything to tell, or if you have any questions, and otherwise, I'll see you in the next episode. Ciao!